In this episode, I'm going to be interviewing writer Isaac Butler about his new book, The Method: How the 20th Century Learned to Act. And we are going to also be reviewing the film noir, The Breaking Point, which starred the first ever method actor star in Hollywood, John Garfield, as well as Patricia, Neal, Phyllis, Thaxter. It was directed by Michael Curtiz. The screenplay was by Ronald McDougall, and it was based on a story by the great Ernest Hemingway. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film, as well as interviews with various industry professionals who work in film, television, and theater. And I'm honored today to welcome to the show Isaac Butler, who is the co-author of The World Only Spins Forward: The Ascent of Angels in America, which was named one of the best books of 2018 by NPR.org. Isaac previously created and hosted the Shakespeare and Politics podcast, Lend Me Your Ears, and currently co-hosts Working, a podcast about the creative process. Butler's writing has appeared in New York Magazine, The Guardian, American Theater, and other publications. He teaches theater history and performance at the New School and elsewhere. And his latest book, which we're discussing today, is The Method: How the 20th Century Learned to Act. Isaac, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me and my blurry microphone here on your show.
Yeah, the good old Zoom blur in the background.
Exactly.
No, perfect. Well, I off the top, I just wanted to say, I love the book for one thing, but I think that as an actor myself and as an acting teacher, we owe you so much that you wrote this, because this is, I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but this is a very important book that I think should be, given to every, veteran actor or young actor or someone just entering into the field, because this is a history that a lot of people may generally know, but the details of it are, just really mind-blowing, and also the perception of method acting, as you point out in the book, by the public, and actors often feel this way as well, is that if you eat a carcass or send a dead rat to your co-star, that means you're a method actor, which I know that you talk about how that's not true, and of course I've always hated reading those articles as well, but I wanted to ask, off the top, because you talk about in the book how you were, you were acting as a kid, you studied method, a version of the method, and you were doing talk radio, and which is by Eric Bogosian, which is a play I love the film as well, and so this
great movie, right?
Yeah, great.
Actually,
great
top shelf Oliver Stone, underappreciated top shelf Oliver Stone film.
I totally agree. I think it's one of his best films, and I've seen the play done a number of times as well. So you had this experience that you felt that you were doing all, the sense memories, and it was sort of exhausting you, and you felt as though maybe you weren't tough enough to be an actor, and then this led you on the road to this curiosity about where does this all come from? Has it damaged actors? Is it good for actors? I was curious, is it more than a place of curiosity that brought you to write this book, which is such a large topic, or was there's something more to it than that?
I mean, on a ground level, this was just something that I was very curious about. It seemed to me really fundamental to the theatrical culture that I grew up in and that I was still working in as a director and watching as an audience member and all of that stuff. And, there's so many legends that have accrued to the story of the method. And, you hear those along the way through your career and studying. And so I really wanted to know, what is the true story of this thing that it felt like had changed and defined in many ways American acting and thus American, cinematic and theatrical culture for so long. And so it just started there. But at the same time, you know, ultimately, I'm interested in telling good stories. I'm interested in compelling storytelling. And I didn't want to just, you know, write a theoretical theoretical treatise or something. I wanted to really make sure that this was an interesting story with interesting characters and an interesting plot and stuff, before I was going to commit the many years that it takes to write a book about it. Because, you know, when you're writing a book, it's a long haul. You got to be able to stay inspired. You know, you got to wake up in the morning and say, I'm interested in telling this story, even when you're mad at yourself or mad at the book because it's not as good as you want it to be yet. And so once I started really digging in order to write the proposal for the book to the publisher, Bloomsbury, you know, when I started digging into this to write the proposal, I just suddenly realized it was a totally fucking crazy story. Like, it was an amazing story, and it was a huge story that took place over 100 years in 2 continents and had a big cast of characters, all of whom are nuts. And, you know, that there was interesting conflict and stories that people thought they understood what was really going on, but there was actually something else behind it. And, you know, then I just got hooked on that. You know, I just fell in love with the people in this story and what the story was going to be. And so ultimately, that was what was really exciting to me, because when you can really grab someone with your narrative, you can fold in so much other stuff within that, you know?
Yeah, because I you know, you say in the top of the book that you structured it very much like a biography.
Yeah, totally.
And I thought that worked very well because, as you said, there are so many characters. You know, you got Stanislavski, you've got Strasberg, Meisner, Stella Adler, Brando. And I love how these characters just come and go, like, and come back. And so it's really, really juicy stuff, and it works both in history and, as you say, a compelling story. But you know, after, now I imagine that when you studied as an actor and you were applying what you had learned to different parts you were playing, but as you talked about talk radio, when you look, and then so you stopped acting at that point, you started to you know, directing. Now you're teaching and writing. Do you look back on that and think, oh gee, you know, maybe I if only I had a different approach at the time? Because as you know, as you and I both know, there are so many different versions of the method, Meisner, Adler. So do you get the itch to still act, or is it something that you don't really have the need for anymore?
I don't have the need for it anymore, and certainly it's probably too late to pursue acting. I mean, I'm 43, I got a wife and kid, I gotta, you know, make my mortgage.
Right.
But at the same time, I did have this feeling when I finished the book that, like, if I went back and did some acting, whether it was a community theater play or voiceover, you know, whatever it was, that I was in a much better place to do it now than when I was 18, that I understood it a lot more, that I had a lot more tools, that I had spent all this time as a director and writer, so I have sort of other ways of looking at it, and that I would probably be able to do it in a way that was healthier. But I can't imagine that would be anything other than a lark or a hobby, or, you know, a fun thing I might do for a day with a friend or something, rather than a serious pursuit. And acting's, if you take it seriously and you're gonna really pursue it, I mean, it's really hard. You have to sacrifice a lot. And yeah, I'm just not willing to do that. I'm already, you know, those sacrifices are for my writing and for my other artistic work.
Right. I see. And you know, something that hadn't really popped out to me is because you know, I'm 35, so most of the perception of people who don't know method is very much the post Raging Bull,
Right.
as you talked about, you know, the actors who gained 60 pounds, who starved, Daniel Day-Lewis, and you know, walking around in character, or, you know, Jared Leto, and things like that, all the things that you talked about in the book, and widely what people think. But you also point out a lot of the different sort of public perceptions over the years, like initially, and which it hadn't really dawned on me that the group theater, especially when it came to live television, that it became sort of the voice of the working class people.
Yeah.
You saw that with Marty, with Rod Steiger playing Marty, and he was, of course, from the Method. A lot of those actors in live television were. So we go from these people who weren't trying to enunciate perfectly like the British actors. They didn't mind slurring their speech. They sounded like ordinary people. And then we get later on with Brando, Marilyn Monroe, James Dean. It became more of a symbol for the rebels. And that hadn't really dawned on me that the public would have also had looked at it that way. And then, of course, it went from there with De Niro and so on and so forth. But I was curious, do you feel after all this research, did the public ever have somewhat of an accurate, general understanding of what this was all about when it was really, blooming in the 50s and bursting in Hollywood? Or what do you think?
Strasberg, certainly, Lee Strasberg, who is the sort of main force in codifying what we think of as the method, or not what we think of as the method, but what is the method. I mean, method acting is Lee Strasberg's thing. Strasberg certainly felt that no one understood it properly, that the public had all of these misconceptions about it, and that he would try to clarify them, but then, people would have even worse misconceptions or whatever. So, I mean, there's always been confusion following it around. That's fun to track, actually, as a writer, to track those confusions.
Right.
But there are certain things that people understood. I mean, people really understood this idea of sense memory and affective memory, of using the memory of sensory details to dig into yourself and find memory of emotional events to use. That's something they definitely understood. You see it in there's an episode of a radio thriller series that Vincent Price does in the 50s. I don't recall the name of it, but it's about an actor who tries to use the method to get away with murder. So he's trying to method act his way into pleading temporary insanity. What's interesting is that there are mistakes about what the method is in that episode, but the thing they get right is this idea of using the self as the basis of the performance.
Right.
A lot of people confused things Stella Adler was doing with things Strasberg was doing, with things Meisner were doing, and those are three very different techniques,
right.
even though they all come from Stanislavski, and they're all chasing after the same idea, which is this idea of, the Russian word is perejivание, but in English it's usually translated as experiencing. It's this idea that the actor should sort of really feel what the character is going through and really experience it in real time in a controlled way that allows them to do their job. So they had that in common, but they have really different ideas and techniques for getting there. And there was a lot of confusion in the public about that. And there was a lot of confusion in the public about which actors studied with which teacher. And Strasberg would get blamed a lot for intentionally sowing that confusion. Whether he did or not is, I think, hard to tell, but he did like taking credit for people. And that's something that, for example, Brando, who did not really study with Lee Strasberg, he studied with Stella Adler and Elia Kazan. Brando would say very, very, particularly in the 60s, very, very mean things about Strasberg. He was very mad at Strasberg for claiming credit for him.
Right. Yeah. No, he did not like Strasberg.
At
all.
It's interesting. There's a period of time where they sort of get along, it seems like, and then but it's hard to track. There's some letters every now and then where not necessarily between Brando and Strasberg, but Brando and other people, where it seems like maybe they are getting along, but ultimately Brando did not care for him. No.
Right. Yeah. That was something I knew well. I mean, he always talked so highly of Stella.
Yeah, of course.
And I believe he studied with her. You'll know more than I, but I believe it was about a year straight of just pure or more of
Yes,
study.
yeah. So Brando got his start as an acting student at Erwin Piscator's dramatic workshop, which actually I teach in that building because it was part of the new school. And that's the building it was in is the building I teach in.
Oh, that's amazing.
School, which is kind of cool. So like in the basement of this building that I teach in is where Marlon Brando
Have you felt his ghosts anywhere?
No, that would be his ghost. Harry Belafonte studied there.
Oh,
a
wow.
lot of Elaine Stritch studied there.
Oh, she was great.
And so Stella Adler ran the acting school there, the acting part of that.
That's
and
right.
he was her teacher for she was his teacher for his first year.
Right.
And then he dropped out after that. Essentially, he and Piscator did not get along, and he was part of it. Piscator had hired him to be in this summer stock. Piscator fired him from the summer stock and he dropped out, but he was very soon after that on stage.
One thing that dawned on me from reading this book was that you must have either discovered some of these films that you hadn't seen before or rewatched them. I don't know. Yeah. So I was curious. What are some films off the top of your head that you hadn't seen before that you discovered researching this book with the various method actors that you really enjoyed?
Well, I think you can feel it in the book that I discovered. I mean, other people had discovered him too, but for myself, John Garfield, and really fell in love with his body of work. The only John Garfield movie I think I had seen two. I had seen Gentleman's Agreement and The Postman Always Rings Twice, which are sort of, I mean, he's in both of those and he's very good in them, but they don't really feature him at his doing what he does best. He's not, I mean, there's a weird thing. I like The Postman Always Rings Twice, but it's not, there's a weird thing in which none of those characters, it's like the world is what you come away with at the end of that movie rather than the individual characters in some way. And Gentleman's Agreement, he's playing a supporting role. He's very good in it. And it's the one movie where he's explicitly Jewish, which is interesting because, his real name was Julius Garfinkel. And, he was a tough Jew from New York City. And, but I knew him a little bit from that. But getting to watch, a grip of his movies, I watched a lot of his films and I really loved them. And one of them, Humoresque, which is a kind of gender flipped Star is Born, is actually going to be part of the Method on Film series that
fantastic.
I'm doing at BAM this summer.
I only just saw that a few months ago and I really, really liked it.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And it had a kind of bad reputation because it's a women's picture, it's a melodrama. Joan Crawford, I think, is an actor whose her reputation is constantly being redeemed or something. It's like people are like, oh, did you realize that Joan Crawford was awesome? It's like, yeah, she's fucking amazing. What are you talking about? But
it feels it feels like something Odette's would have written to me anyways.
It has that the classical musician thing.
Of course, like Golden Boy.
And Oscar Levant's incredible in it. He's incredible in it. Joan Crawford's incredible in it. It's and you can really feel, I think, that Bradley Cooper actually took a lot from it for his version of A Star is Born.
I still haven't seen that, but
the way the character's alcoholism works in that movie feels very in tune with what's going on with Joan Crawford and her. So there was I had never seen I mean, there's tons of them, to be completely honest. I had never seen Five Easy Pieces before.
Wow.
That was a huge revelation.
That's a great one.
And that's also another one that's in the series. And then there were other movies where, you're looking at them through the Method lens. So you had seen them before, but then you're seeing them again, thinking about, well, how is the Method working in this? The Graduate being a perfect example. I mean, how many times have you seen The Graduate? But when you watch it again going, oh, well, all of these people had studied with Lee Strasberg.
That's right.
You start to notice some things about how that movie is constructed. Or Symbiopsychotaxoplasm, which is a great experimental documentary. William Greaves, who made it, taught at the Actors Studio. He was a big mover and shaker there, and you can see that movie's questions about what's performance, what's real, what's authentic, what's not, even the kind of scene study they're doing in that movie. The Actors Studio is really all over that film. I had never really seen a Kim Stanley movie before. Kim Stanley only made 6 movies, but she's brilliant in all of them. I guess I had seen The Right Stuff, which she has a very small role in, but I didn't know it was her. But The Goddess is great. Frances is not a good movie, but she's kind of amazing in it. And I had never seen The Pawnbroker, which I think is a truly, all-time
so
one of the great film performances of all time is Rod Steiger in that movie. So there was plenty of stuff I hadn't seen, but all you can do is make up for that. All you can do is sit down every afternoon and watch a movie until you feel like you really know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, those are all phenomenal films that I really love. Since Joan Crawford's come up, what's always fascinated me about acting in film or television and theater is we have this period before method came into Hollywood film. So I know Martin Scorsese calls it pre-Brando, but I guess it's more pre-Garfield or pre-Francois Tone, I suppose.
Well, Garfield's 38, right? And Brando or Streetcar is early 50s. Brando had done The Men, but I don't know that counts because not that many people saw it.
And, that's a good film, but it's not very well known.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell when Brando thinks the script isn't good because he disengages in that movie. But when he's on, he's really on. And Clift is, I guess, 48 is when Clift starts to break through, right? Isn't The Search 1948?
Well, I think the Red River, I think, was before. Correct me if I'm wrong.
He filmed Red River first, but it came out second.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so that's like 48. So there's like a decade between Garfield and those other guys that I think is the period that Scorsese's really talking about. That sort of as the studio system's trying to figure out what's going on.
Right, exactly. And so we have these actors. It's one thing that always annoys me is people who perhaps are not interested in the classic, what is known as the golden years of Hollywood, or the classic film period, which still counts as the 50s, but let's say 40s and back. People feel that the acting is hammy and not very good and things like that. But there are a lot of really great, truthful performances. Joan Crawford being one of them, and these people did not have not only did they not have method training, but they didn't even necessarily have that much formal training. Like I know the studio systems, when they put them on contract, there were classes. I don't know what those classes were really about. But I was curious, who are some actors that pop out to you that were before this came to America, the method in film, who you felt were quite truthful?
Well, I should say that one of those institutions that's providing classes is the Actors Lab in Los Angeles, which is all ex-group theater people. And so they are teaching Stanislavski, and Michael Chekhov is there teaching his version of Stanislavski technique in the 40s. So it is sort of starting to percolate into the water. And then with Brando, it really bursts through, and in Cliff to some extent. I mean, Marilyn Monroe had studied with Michael Chekhov before she came to New York City.
I didn't know that. That was something I did not know.
And so it's out there, it's in the water. All of the studios, I mean, most of the studios had a contract with the Actors Lab to do training.
So this would have started in the 40s, would you say?
This would have started in I forget when the Actors Lab started, but I'm going to take a guess and say 42.
Okay.
And that's Phoebe Brand, Morris Karnofsky, Roman Bonin, people like that. And it was destroyed by HUAC. HUAC kind of, the Red Scare destroyed it because a bunch of those folks had been in the communist cell that was within the group theater. But to answer your question, I feel like it's important to recognize that pre-method acting, particularly studio system acting, had different norms and ideas of what good acting meant. So when we talk about it not being good or feeling stiff or hammy or whatever, I feel like that's the wrong way. Not that you were talking about it, but when people say that to me, I'm always like, that's not the right way to think about it. It had a different idea of what good was. And that had to do with the needs of the studio system to have, it was like a factory. They needed people they could slot into particular places, and they needed stars that they could build a kind of fan base around to sell these films. And so what was really important in that time was that you had a very clear on and off-screen persona, that
A
your type,
right?
that were related to one another, and that you were always figuring out how to use your type on screen. And so Joan Crawford is, of course, a master of that. And there's a lot of other people who are great at that, who also find interesting truth within that. I mean, you know, when people are like, oh, well, did you think acting got better or whatever? It's like, well, it's really hard when you look at Barbara Stanwyck to say, you know, like Barbara Stanwyck's one of the greatest actors of all time.
Look at her in Babyface. I mean, it's totally
Sure.
true, realistic and honest performance. I felt, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, look at you know, Cary Grant is sort of the greatest movie star of all time, right? I mean, his acting is incredible.
Absolutely.
Jimmy Stewart, even before he goes to World War II and comes back damaged and does his, you know, the whole mythology of him. You know, there's a lot of I think there's a lot of really great acting around that time period. And so to me, my project is about describing a shift and then what that shift caused. And one of the things about that shift, though, is there's a new emphasis on truth. There's a new emphasis on telling the truth, being authentic, and all of that sort of stuff, which is not what Hollywood or the public wanted before that. They, you know, they wanted artifice, they wanted fun, they wanted, you know, these types, and I think lots of great stuff came out of that.
Yeah, no, well said. No, I totally agree. And I imagine just actors had to go, you know, when you saw Brando, I don't think there had been too many male performances who had gone that deep. I mean, you know, they may have been perhaps truthful before, but to like someone like Mitchum or Cagney, like they were always pretty honest in there. But you know, if you had asked them to do the Stella scene, I don't think they would have gone that far. Is I guess part of what the method brought in, was just going deeper.
You know, I seem to remember that Mitchum was on the short list of people to play Stanley Kowalski in the film. You know,
I didn't know that.
I mean, Brando obviously was going to end up being Brando, but I think, you know, it's always interesting to play this what if. You know, John Garfield turned down Out of the Past before Mitchum took it on. It's really a fascinating thing to think about. Out of the Past starring John Garfield. It's a really different movie. I think, even though they're similarly tough guys. I think Cagney probably could have done it. You know, I don't know that it would have felt as raw.
Oh, but, yeah, he would have been good. Yeah, but you're right.
Cagney's in it. Cagney's, raw. Yeah. I mean, yes, the thing the method is bringing in, the thing these Stanislavski folks are bringing in, is a rawness, a vulnerability, and authenticity that was really new. And it really is new. And you can see it in one of the things that I really enjoy is this period from about 1948 to 1960, where you have Stanislavski actors and traditional actors overlapping in the same movie. And they're kind of wrestling it out. And often the battle between the characters on screen is being played out in acting style. You know, one of my favorites, which I didn't get to talk about in the book, is Anatomy of a Murder, where you have, you know, Jimmy Stewart is really the small town lawyer, but he's also the old school studio actor. And then everyone around him is like Ben Gazzara and George C. Scott. You know, they're this new group of method informed, you know, really authentic and new kind of masculinity. And both in the story and in the film itself is Jimmy Stewart tap dancing around them, basically, and just running away with the whole thing. You know, it's really fascinating. And then on the flip side of that, you have something like Joe Mankiewicz's Julius Caesar, which I think is a really underrated film.
Great film.
Where the whole point of that, of casting Brando as Mark Antony, is that you, the audience, are underestimating whether Brando is going to be able to pull this off, just like the conspirators are underestimating, you know, Mark Antony and what he's going to be able to do once he gives that funeral.
That's a good point.
And so that movie's both text and subtext is, you've got this kind of neurotic American, and then everyone else is, you know, James Mason and John Gielgud, and we've just got to do this thing now. Perhaps we should murder Caesar. You know, it's a very that conflict is both subtext and text at the same time.
That's interesting. It's something I hadn't actually thought of. So they were all probably learning so much from each other at the same time. Because even if you look at someone like William Holden, who had done the Golden Boy film,
Right.
And he's so terrible in the film.
It's a terrible, isn't it a terrible
Yeah.
movie? It's
so bad.
Film.
It's unfortunate. I thought Lee J. Cobb, of course he's from this actor. I don't know. Was he in the? I think
he was a group theater guy. He was in the group, yeah.
I thought he was quite good, but Holden is so hammy. And then you look at him as, every film, I don't know how soon after that, but if you start to look at him in the 50s, 60s, all the way to Network, suddenly he's, you feel as though he's from the method. Like he's so truthful. So these guys were just, and women were picking things up, I'm sure, learning.
He's great in what's the Billy Wilder film he did?
Sunset Boulevard.
Sunset Boulevard. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. Well, yeah. Duh. Sunset Boulevard. He's amazing in Sunset Boulevard, right?
Oh, there's another one. Yeah, you're right.
But I was thinking of Stalag 17.
That's right,
I was surprised. If you watch Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17 back to back, you can really see that guy had range, I think.
Yeah.
They're both within the sort of same tranche, but they're really fascinating performances. And then of course, by the time you get to Network, where he's sort of ruined, I mean, it's like looking at he really has ruined himself at that point. He's not that old in that movie.
No, he died only 5-6 years later.
Yeah. It's such an amazing performance.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well,
but back to Julius Caesar, Brando did seek out Gielgud and get tips from him. And he did listen to records of people performing Shakespeare and stuff like that. He knew what he didn't know, and he was really interested in that. It's only later in his career that you get the kind of lazy, almost self-parody that he could dip into.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm sure this because I studied Meisner for a few years, and I teach it. I've been teaching it the last 6 years as well. And one thing Meisner always said was that you'll learn most of your acting in front of a camera or on a stage. And I imagine, like, just from having this conversation with you, that the Brits and the American actors and all these people, as you said, they're having to work together. So they're all learning and not necessarily in a classroom, but they're applying it to the camera and so to speak.
I mean, the big acting school in the studio system was the older actor taking you under his or her wing and teaching you how to act for the camera. There's story after story about that. Elia Kazan only really acted in one movie, City for Conquest.
Yeah, with Cagney,
which is an interesting movie. It's worth seeking out.
I quite like it. Yeah,
Kazan is incredible in it. It's just like there's a weird thing where it's trying to be both like a hard-bitten crime movie and a very sentimental family movie about immigrants. Yeah. And it's sort of these two different movies that don't get along. But Cagney and Kazan are both great in it.
I agree.
But Cagney and George Raft taught Kazan basically how to act for the camera. On set for that movie. And Garfield, I think, talked about Claude Rains doing the same for him in Four Daughters, Daughters Courageous. And, that's a real thing that people learned. And so, you do have this kind of cross-cultural exchange between different ideas of acting. Sometimes that leads to real tension, obviously.
Right.
But sometimes it's, people are giving each other tips. They're figuring stuff out.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I had actually thought of that because which brings me to my next question, because often as you discuss, beautifully in the book, was the conflict that came from the British actors and criticizing the method. Well, you've got to enunciate, you're mumbling, you're only concerned with the emotion and not with the story, and it's things like that. So I think that is more well known, that the British had their way of doing things, that goes into Olivier. And I know that has evolved and changed, to this day. But I was curious, in your research, did you find how other countries in Europe or around the world, how they were learning? Because you look at Ingmar Bergman's films. I mean, that's some of the best acting I've ever seen. And I couldn't tell you where Liv Ullmann trained. I was curious if you knew, Italy, Mastroianni, Sophia Loren. I don't know if did the method get to these countries at that time, or?
I reached a point in the research process where I just needed to triage, or the book was never going to come out, because it was going to be
So
1,000 pages long. It would be a really infinite subject matter. So I will tell you that that's not an area of expertise for me. At some point I had to be like, this is really about
yeah.
America and Russia.
And in
And then
Russia.
it's like, well, what are the countries that are really relating to America directly in this period? And it's really Britain. So,
Yeah.
French theatrical training is really steeped in clowning and mime and in classical technique. Classical technique being, textual analysis, enunciation, training the voice and body, almost performing it like a musical score. There's a rich clowning and improv tradition in Italy, of course, that comes out of Commedia dell'arte. There's also kind of opera training in Italy. A guy I went to high school with is actually a big deal stage actor in Sweden, but I don't know what the training is there. I mean, I imagine it's very similar to British training. Most European training was very similar to British training. A focus on classical technique, learning how to fence, learning how to use your body and voice, the musicality of it, et cetera, and so forth.
Right.
Building the sort of outside and then trusting the inside to kind of come of its own volition.
I see. Well, there's a sequel there for you. You go to every country.
The anti-method. Yeah, exactly. A geographical survey of acting technique.
Yeah.
But I will say that, it's not like they didn't know about the method. Strasberg lectured in Europe a lot, particularly after his second wife, Paula, died.
Yeah.
He was friends with Alan Rene, and so he lectured in France a lot. He lectured in Italy a lot. So it's not like they didn't know about this stuff. It's just a very different tradition.
Right. I see. One thing that, well, in a way, it was shocking, in a way not, because we're talking about the 1930s. But one thing that I was actually reading this chapter on when I was on the subway, and I was sort of like, wow. What that took me by surprise was that when they were doing the House of Connolly, the group theater, that the black actors in the cast, they were excluded from different, anything that they were doing outside of the play. They had a different director. I was surprised that this.
So was I when I read
that the race, that they were quite racist, and I was curious. Did when you're putting all this research in a book, does anything just kind of put a damper on these people that you're kind of in your head all these years, or is it just sort of understanding that it was the time? Or was curious how that was.
Well, there were people who were doing integrated theater at the time. There was Orson Welles with the Mercury Theater, which is only a few years, So
Macbeth,
I don't know that I accept that it was just the time. Do you know?
Right,
there were people then. But I do think it's important to not let a presentist bias get in too much when you're doing history. The purpose of history is to understand the past, you gotta get in there and understand these folks on their own terms.
Of course.
But this was a failure. And Bobby Lewis, who is a member of the group theater, talks about it as a failure in his memoirs. There were people there at the time who were like, this is fucked up. For those of you who are watching this who don't know this story, the group theater, is the premier leftist theater in probably American history, and one of the most famous and mythologized theater companies in America. And part of the reason why is that out of it came Stella Adler, Lee Strasberg, and Sanford Meisner, the three most important acting teachers of the United States. Harold Clurman, the most important theater critic, who was also an important theater director, Cheryl Crawford, who's an important theater producer, and Aaliyah Kazan and Clifford Odets, and John Garfield. I mean, all those people were in the same theater company, and they were they were utopianists. They had this kind of collective utopian ideal that they were going to create a new way through which, America could express itself in theater and the American people could relate to each other. And it's where the method was born. And so you would think that company would be an integrated one, or you would think that company would have a better sense of social justice. And they did on some issues, but race and gender were not really two of those issues.
Right.
They were very interested in economic justice. They were very interested in immigrant stuff. I mean, many of them were the children of immigrants, or some of the Lee Strasberg himself immigrated from a shtetl. Many of them were Jews. You know, those issues were very important to them. Many of them were gay, although they didn't talk about it.
Right. Yeah, including Meisner.
Yeah, and the gay within the company, the gay members were out and fully accepted. You know, Cheryl Crawford had a girlfriend, Meisner and Bobby Lewis had boyfriends. You know, it was not a big deal, it seems to me. So they were very cosmopolitan in a lot of those ways. But their first show, House of Connolly, which had a number of Black actors in it, including Rose McClendon, who's a very, very important Black actress, so much so that a theater in Harlem was named after her, the Rose McClendon Players. They were not allowed to attend the method workshops that the group was doing, and they were rehearsed by a separate director until it came time to do run-throughs. So obviously I don't approve of that. You know what I mean? It doesn't damper my enthusiasm for telling their story, because I find them to be fascinating people. And part of what I'm fascinated by is their flaws.
Yeah, that, you know, well said. I mean, I can understand how, you know, one has to just sort of go into the flaws and the problems, as well as the good parts of what they accomplished and who they were. You know, you said something that was really interesting about Stanislavski, because he was someone, even though he was, you know, temperamental and had a lot of conflict with various members of the Moscow Art Theater, but he was extremely open-minded, as you say, and he constantly evolved how he was teaching, which I think is the mark of a true artist and a great teacher. And I was curious if there was something that they all had in common that you admire the most about either the members of the group theater and so forth.
I mean, I admire their, like I said, utopian visionary quality, you know, that they really wanted to usher in some kind of golden age. I admire that. You know, this is, the group is founded in 1930. You know, we're coming there. Most of those people were at times in the group's history literally starving. You know, they lived in this big flop house, and, you know, friends would drop off groceries because they had no food. And, you know, they were willing to sacrifice anything for art, and I'm not willing to do that, but I find it admirable and interesting when people are, you know. And so the fact that they had these big problems, how do you tell the truth in acting, how do you know, that's something Stanislavski has in common with all of those folks, and they just really dedicated their lives to the pursuit of great art. I find that unbelievably moving. Unbelievably moving. You know, they weren't cynics. And living in a very cynical age right now, I find their idealism and their commitment to their ideals, even though sometimes they fell down on those ideals, as we just talked about with the House of Connolly. You know, they had them though. But you know, to them, you know, art wasn't worth making if it wasn't great, and so they were going to dedicate their lives to great art, and I find that incredibly moving.
Yeah, no, me too. You know, obviously this is a big subject, so there was a ton of research that you did. I was curious, after reading all of the different acting books that, you know, either Meisner did or Strasberg or Stella Adler, A Method to Their Madness. You know, I have here, I know Foster interviewed you, Foster Hirsch, of course.
Good guy.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I've had this book for years and I've seen him do some other interviews, and I didn't know what he looked like. So when you had said that, I was like, oh. So there are so many books. The Fervent Years I love, which is about the group theater by Harold Klerman. What are some of the acting books that you like the best, or that you recommend the most?
About the craft of acting specifically?
Yeah.
So there isn't a great one about Strasberg's method, to be completely honest. His book, A Dream of Passion, which is edited posthumously, is, if you want to understand like what it is and his core values, it's pretty good. And there's a book of his lectures or his stuff at the Actor Studio called Strasberg at the Actor Studio that's pretty good. But one of the weird things is that Stanislavski, Stella Adler, Meisner, and Strasberg had one really big thing in common, which is that they were, for the most part, terrible writers. And they had a really,
Right.
really difficult time expressing their ideas and
Yeah,
writing.
Meisner gave up a few times on
Yeah.
his. I know
And so
that. Yeah.
Meisner's book is really written by a journalist who's
Yeah.
shadowing him
The
and then
class. Yeah.
transcribing their conversations. And that's a really interesting book, I think.
Have it here if anyone's interested. Yeah. This is a
Yeah.
great, great book.
The best book on Adler technique is called Acting with Adler. And it's a sort of similar to that book, except instead of being a transcript, it's a student, a protege of hers walking you through literally step by step what acting in Adler school is like and the kind of things she said and what the concepts are. It's the clearest explanation of her technique. The best thing by Stella Adler, and they're truly brilliant, are her 2 books of script analysis lectures. Stella Adler on the great playwrights in 2 volumes. You know, there's one on the great American playwrights and one on the great European playwrights. And those are edited transcripts of the lectures she did in her script analysis class. And they are truly brilliant. If you want to understand something about how theater works, they're great. They are not acting textbooks.
Right.
The clearest writer about acting of any of those folks was Bobby Lewis. Bobby Lewis's 3 books, Method or Madness, Slings and Arrows, and Advice to the Players, are incredibly useful and delightful. He's hilarious.
Oh, I got to read him. I haven't read his books. I got to read his. Yeah, I got to check
Slings
those
and
out.
Arrows is a memoir. You know, read it after The Fervent Years, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's a memoir. The second half of it, when he's sort of teaching and trying to start an opera company and stuff, is not as interesting. But the stuff about his early life and the group and his stage directing career is great. Method or Madness is a collection of lectures in which Lewis is sort of trying to rescue Stanislavski from Strasberg. Strasberg blurbed the book weirdly, but those lectures are actually really concrete and helpful. And then Advice to the Players is what it sounds like. It's, you know, really concrete writing about acting that I find very useful.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check out the Bobby Lewis ones because
they're
I
out of print,
those.
I think, but they're
okay.
they're worth. I mean, you could get them at a used bookstore. They're worth seeing.
Okay. Okay, great. I'll have to track those down. I was curious when you're writing a, you know, this is, you know, history of the method, like a history book in this biographical format. How much do you try to get in your own opinions? Like I know you talked about you know, not being too enthusiastic about James Dean, for example.
That's probably the most opinionated part of the book, is when I just dunk on James Dean for 4 pages. No, that's a good question. The answer is I tried to be very restrained about that.
Yeah.
You know, my idea, I talked to my editor about this very early on. My editor is this wonderful guy, Ben Hyman. This is the second book we've worked on together. We had many lunches and during the pandemic, Zoom calls. And, you know, in some ways, I think of the book as a conversation with Ben. One thing I said early on to Ben is, I don't think I'm in this book. I mean, maybe I'm in the intro, but I don't think I'm in this book. I don't think there's a first person pronoun in this book, but I think you should feel through the prose style that a subjective human being is definitely writing it, you know, like right. And that was my goal. Was obviously there's a million ways to tell this story, and so you're getting the version of it that Isaac Butler is telling you. It is factually true. I've checked it a million, you know, I had it professionally fact checked. I checked it myself. You know, I'm sure there's errors in it, or there probably are. I hope there aren't, but you know, it's hard in a book this size. But anyway, you know, I've made the best effort possible to tell the story, to tell the truth, and to get into how the people living through this understood their own time and what they were living through. And then every now and then, when it's necessary, I zoom out and you get a little bit of my perspective. Right. I don't say it's my perspective, but it's very clear. So for example, you know, we keep bringing up this House of Connolly thing. There's a paragraph in there where I say, you know, the group theater was the most politically active major theater company, but they had a huge blind spot when it came to race. You know, that's obviously me talking,
right?
You know,
right.
There's a couple moments like that. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding going on that the people involved don't know is a misunderstanding, but we know now is a misunderstanding because we have better access to the historical record. for example. One example of that is, you know, Lee Strasberg goes to Moscow in 1935 and he goes to see 1934, excuse me, and he goes to see a couple plays at the Moscow Art Theater. He's like, wait a second, I based my whole life on Stanislavski and these productions fucking suck. And he gets so angry he refuses to meet with Stanislavski.
Yeah.
And what Lee Strasberg did not know is that Stanislavski was in very poor health.
Right.
He really wasn't part of the day-to-day operations of the theater at all at that point. The bad news about the theater was being kept from him. You know, it was really, you know, the wheels were coming off the wagon. And if Stanislavski had been sitting in the audience next to him, he would have been angry about it too. So, you know, that's me telling you that because I know more than Strasberg did. I try to think of it sort of in the ways of, you know, if you have a third person novel, when is the narrator moving away from the character to tell you some things the character can't know, and then the camera is kind of zooming back in. That was how I kind of tried to think about it, but I tried to be pretty restrained. Except I thought it was important with the James Dean stuff because he's so associated with the method to kind of issue a corrective about him, especially because actually, you know, he was accused during his own life of just copying Brando and Clift, and watching those three movies, well, rewatching two of them because I had never seen Giant, but I had seen the other two. Rewatching them right after watching a bunch of Brando and Clift movies, you're like, they're right. That's all he's doing. You know, it's all he's doing in those first two movies is like a not great job of copying Brando and Clift. It's only in Giant that he starts to move away from that a little bit. And Giant, I think, is actually a very good movie and by far my favorite of his performances.
Yeah, no, he's great. He's really great in Giant. Actually, I know Brando, I believe it was in his memoir. I'm not 100%, but he had said that, you know, by the time he did Giant, James Dean was becoming James, you know, in other words, becoming James Dean, like he was becoming good. So unfortunately he, of course, you know, died tragically, but I think he would have went on to be something quite special. But obviously he is, you know, for a lot of different reasons. I know what you mean. I can certainly see that he is, you know, mimicking them, Brando in particular, but I still find him to be incredibly truthful, even though sometimes he's doing a bit much, you know, like he's either screaming out or it's and
I just think, you know, I looked up the New York Times review of East of Eden, I think it was a few days ago, and even the New York Times reviewer is like, this is like a dime store Brando impression. You know, it's like, I mean, you know, people knew it then. We've sort of forgotten it now, it seems to me.
It's interesting.
Sometimes I think it's truthful. That's certainly what he was after. I keep going back to that thing that Kazan said about him, which was he could either get it right on the first take or he could never get it right, because he really didn't have, or he didn't really have a technique that was helpful to him.
Right.
And there's lots of people who tried to sort of claim he had a lot more technique than that, but I think you can tell it's like, I don't know. It's just, he's not the actor for me.
Right.
He's very charismatic and he's very good looking. And when he gets it right, there's something very exciting going on there. Very pure, almost naive and exciting. I agree with you about that. But to me, those moments are pretty few and far between.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about acting in general to me. And I know that this is something Stanislavski, you know, dedicated so much of his life to, was how do you, I mean, of course he's coming from the theater. How do you consistently, you know, deliver when you're going up at 8 o'clock or the camera is about to, later, of course, in film is right before action. How do you consistently give a good performance? And so he built a system around doing that. And of course, so did Meisner, Adler, and Strasberg. And it went from there. But as you said, you know, here we are and this is something that I've always really wondered. And I really gave a lot of thought to what you were saying about how, you know, in the 1980s, we begin to see the method declining and all the different versions of the method for a variety of reasons. You know, for one thing, they begin to die. You know, Strasberg died in 82. Meisner 97, Stella Adler 92. And at the same, and this is something you said is really interesting, was that in the 70s we saw these character driven films, and America is learning about all this government corruption and the Nixon and the Watergate, and so we get into the 80s and people just couldn't deal with it. It's kind of like Reagan, the first version of Make America Great Again, and the birth of the blockbusters. So we're seeing stories, at least in film, mainstream film, that is, that are less about character, more on spectacle, twists and turns, we saw those kind of things in the 70s as well, like the Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno, but they were not, they were big, but they weren't as, they weren't as known, I suppose, or hitting the audience as much as something of the character driven films. And so we start to see this decline. Younger people are more conservative. I like what you said. The younger people, their parents were Benjamin Braddock, and everyone was becoming Mrs. Robinson.
Yeah,
I thought that was such a perfect way of putting it. Like let's not deal with ourselves, so to speak. But I wonder if I was curious if you feel, myself being a professional actor now since 2008. In a general sort of way, I find a lot of people are concerned first and foremost with their career, and I got to learn how to act, be a good actor to get that career.
Right.
And of course, career is important. And I mean, this is just my general impression, but certainly the actors coming from the group up until the 70s, let's say, I think it was often the reverse. They were seeing Brando, they were seeing Kim Stanley, saying, how the hell do you do that? I want to do that, And so do you think that also has something to do with it? That
that's a really interesting question, and you're the first person to ask it, so I'm going to puzzle this out a little bit. I think you're correct that there was a certain amount of I am committed to pursuing greatness in acting, and that was less about the career necessarily. At the same time, one of the reasons why the Actors Studio became so central is because you could get cast out of it.
That's a good point.
And they tried to sort of be like, well, no, that's not true. If you're currently casting a project, you're not allowed to come watch actors at the Actors Studio, which is such an obvious fig leaf. Like, a director's not going to go there thinking about who they might cast later on in a project. And Kazan, in the early days of the Actors Studio, Kazan is the best American film and theater director simultaneously, basically a thing that no one else has ever achieved. He's casting out of the Actors Studio. He's discovering people at the Actors Studio, and he's putting them on Broadway, and he's putting them in movies. And so a lot of people are coming to the Actors Studio, or once the live TV thing gets going, you enroll, you don't enroll, you join the Actors Studio if you're lucky enough. I mean, thousands of people would audition. They take like 2 to 5 people, but you go in the Actors Studio and you would walk out of there and walk right into a casting office and be in a live TV drama the next day. I mean, a lot of those folks, James Dean, actually, he does pretty good work in live TV drama.
I agree.
Paul Newman, in Bang the Drum Slowly, right?
Yeah, the TV one,
yeah, which is, not as, I mean, the movie's not that great. The TV movie is probably even less great, but
that's true.
Paul Newman is amazing in it. Brando even does a few. Kim Stanley, Rod Steiger, all the Julie Harris. Joanne Woodward, these folks are they're literally walking out of the studio and getting jobs. So part of the appeal of the studio was a careerist thing. At the same time, the studio's actual ethos were incredibly pure and idealistic, right? They couldn't have been pure. I mean, down to no one took a salary until, for the first few years, or, only the members who were currently employed needed to pay dues. I mean, the whole point was, this is a gymnasium so you can get better at your craft. And, there's lots of acting schools that sort of want to talk like that, but they cost a lot of money to attend.
Right.
There's very few that don't cost a lot of money to attend. And so, of course, I'm very sympathetic to a young actor going to the neighborhood playhouse, for example. I'm not picking on the neighborhood playhouse. I'm just saying, you're a young actor who wants to go to the place where Meisner technique was born. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm spending tens of thousands of dollars a year to go here. My parents' money or a bank's money or the federal government's money or my money. You're going to want to make good on that. And I've actually talked to the heads of these schools are aware of this. I've interviewed the head of the neighborhood playhouse and she knows this is a problem. She's like, I want to reduce the tuition. I want it to be as close to free as it possibly can. If I could get a rich person to underwrite this school, we're trying to find them.
So, of course.
So again, I don't mean to pick on them. I'm just saying one thing that I have noticed in my last decade or so of teaching is a lot more pressure around this, because school just gets more and more expensive. And so no matter what your field, it's like, well, what of this am I going to be able to use? And the stuff of it that I'm going to be able to use, I'm going to concentrate on. And the rest of it, I am going to actively treat like bullshit. And so I think that's hard. I have heard, now the other side of that is I have heard lots of acting teachers and lots of elder statespeople of acting who I've interviewed, and none of this wound its way into the book, but they're all like, all these kids care about is getting just enough in their toolbox that they can land a Netflix series.
Right.
That is a complaint I hear about all the time.
Right.
I don't know how much of that's kids these days griping and how much of it's true, because I'm not in those classes. I'm not on those sets. But I do hear that a lot of, you think you've got enough to get onto a Netflix show. Well, that's not actually enough to sustain you as an actor.
Of course.
And another thing that's changed is the stage, which I think most people who've done both will tell you that stage acting is harder. I don't know. I haven't done them, but I'm just saying, a lot of young actors don't care about the stage, which is fine. It's their right to not care about the stage. I'm not criticizing that, but a lot of people will say, well, maybe that's good enough for a Netflix show, but you won't be able to do a run at Shakespeare in the Park with that attitude. And the other actor is saying, who gives a shit about Shakespeare in the Park?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And maybe that's a reasonable point of view now. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
In a similar way, when Jessica Tandy writes a letter to Marlon Brando telling him off when they were working on A Streetcar Named Desire, she said, you need to do the following things to be a great actor. And what she means is a great stage actor, first and foremost. And she means an actor capable of doing, and she lists the playwrights. And they're playwrights that we never do anymore. Goldoni. When was the last time you saw a Goldoni production or a Schiller production? I mean, it's probably been 8 years since I've seen a Moliere play. You see the list of plays she's talking about. She's like, no one cares about those folks anymore, except for Ibsen. I mean, Ibsen was on that list. We care about Ibsen. We care about Chekhov. But so it's one of those debates where I sort of have a lot of sympathy for all sides of it.
Yeah. It's hard it's hard to simplify it. There's no simple answer for it. And
I mean, does Chris Pratt need to go study at Stella Adler for a few years?
He might.
He has his thing that he's doing. He doesn't want to do. It's not like he's trying to do serious drama or whatever. So who knows?
Yeah. It's things have just changed so much. But I appreciate how you explored that in the book, because this is something I think about often is why has this declined? But at the same time, as you say towards the end, is that the method, even if it's not being formally taught, it's everywhere, because these guys were the ones that come up with scene analysis when everybody does that. Totally. Where's the beat change? What do you want? What's in the way? What are the circumstances? I mean, people, if they want to say that they know nothing about this, they're utilizing it all the time. So that was something that hadn't really dawned on me. And it's very,
anytime you ask, what does my character want here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anytime you're asking those kinds of questions, those are Stanislavski questions.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. And so the scene analysis, perhaps the scene analysis has been the biggest thing that has just kind of, no one is going to deny that you need to do that.
Totally.
So no, I found that really, really interesting.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I know that you said that there was a lot of things you had to leave out, and I'm curious if the teachings of David Mamet and William H. Macy was something like they were using a version of Stanislavski that they turned
I mean,
into.
I had a version where I kind of go after Mamet's true and false.
Oh, and I have it right here.
But I
The first
cut
line
it.
is Stanislavski is an amateur. I was like, well, sometimes I wonder if he did that for shock value.
I mean, true and false is an effort on David Mamet's part to build a cult around himself while decrying all other acting teachers as cults. It's watered down first year Meisner
Yeah,
without any of the genius that makes Meisner work.
yeah,
And if
yeah.
you watch David Mamet's movies, the good actors are good in them, and everyone else, the actors who are, the great actors do a good work in his movies, and everyone else is terrible. I mean,
Flats, yeah.
I think that and I would say this is someone who actually I like a lot of Mamet's plays.
Me too.
He's had this late in life political conversion that's pretty grotesque.
Oh yes.
And it's been a while since he's written a good play, but there's many of his plays that I think are really expertly constructed and written. He wrote Wag the Dog, one of the great political satires. So I'm not trying to completely dismiss him because I don't like his politics or whatever. But I remember reading True and False when it came out and was like, this is kind of, I mean, some of this is good, but this is mostly bullshit. And then when I read actual Meisner stuff, you're like, yeah, this is just warmed over.
Yeah.
This is just warmed over Meisner.
Yeah.
Stanislavski though was an amateur. It's just that the thing is that there weren't, before he started the Moscow Art Theater, he was an amateur, but an amateur actor means a different thing in Russia than it does in the United States. And so, that's an example of the kind of thing that Mamet's doing in that book. That's just very, very, very dishonest, I think.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I've had
three uses of the knife in writing in restaurants has some useful stuff in it. Like again, it's not that he's like completely without merit. It's just
no, not at all.
The stuff in True and False that's useful you can get elsewhere from better folks, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's also his students wrote this. I don't know if you ever read this one, Practical Handbook.
Oh yeah, because Practical Aesthetics or whatever is that. Yeah, I mean, I read it. I haven't read it in a while, and I did not. There's a lot of second and third generation acting teachers that I don't get into. I mean, you'll notice this is much to my chagrin that Uta Hagen is barely in the book at all. Even though Uta Hagen's an incredibly, incredibly important acting teacher, and Respect for Acting is an incredibly important book. Again, you have to sort of come up with rules for yourself to keep the material from getting totally out of hand.
Right.
And one of the sort of rules I set for myself is like, I am dealing with the originators.
Exactly.
And not the second generation. And Uta Hagen is actually the second generation. She's an important acting teacher. I wish I could have dealt more with Bobby Lewis, as well as an acting teacher, because I thought that his stuff about acting is really useful. But ultimately, focusing on Uta Hagen wasn't going to get me anything that focusing on, or get the reader anything, get the book anything. It's not about me, it's about the book. That focusing on Strasberg and Adler wasn't going to put in there.
Right. And I know you touched on the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and because a lot of great actors came out of that. Really, I'm a huge fan of John Cassavetes and his wife Jenna Rollins, who both went there. And I put Jenna Rollins right up there with Meryl Streep. It's a shame she's not talked about as much as her. But you had mentioned that they were I can't recall the exact year, but they had been already experimenting with naturalistic approaches. I don't know if you found out more about what they formally were teaching at that time.
There's a book called Modern Acting by, hold on, let me look it up.
Sure.
Modern Acting, the Lost Chapter of American Film and Theater by Cynthia Barron. That's trying to talk about the sort of non-Strasberg, maybe non-Adler too, not the big three naturalistic acting that sort of exists independently. It's actually where I first learned about the Actors Lab in LA. A lot of the stuff about the Actors Lab, sort of came out of that.
Right.
Came from that book, because she does a lot of work around it. There's a lot of stuff about Ada in there, and about the main teacher at Ada, whose name was Jellinger, I believe was his name, who was doing a lot of kind of script analysis type stuff there. It didn't have the same kind of psycho-emotional components you know, and it didn't have as formal, you know, what is your task problem? What is your action? What we think, you know, that sort of stuff.
Right.
But he had his own version of that. And he was interested in a more naturalistic style than Steele Mackay, who founded ADA and was a disciple of Delsarte, of Francois Delsarte, the great oratory teacher. And so Mackay's way of doing it was, you know, very presentational. And Jellinger is taking it in a new direction when he takes over.
Right. Yeah, that was something I was always curious about, because there's a great story of Cassavetes embarrassing Strasberg. I don't know if that was something you came across.
I don't remember. I mean, to be honest, you know, I worked on this book for 3 years, so there's a lot there. But tell it.
Well, he was angry that he couldn't get. He felt that all the actors were getting cast from the Actors Studio.
Yes,
and because he wasn't a member.
He was correct.
Yeah, and he wasn't a member. He was struggling. I believe he had auditioned and he didn't get in. And he was also someone who hated method acting. He talks about in some of his in a book that Ray Carney wrote about him, Cassavetes, that he's best acting teacher he had, kept him on stage for an hour and just said one thing to him. For the entire time he was taught by this the entire time that he was taught by this gentleman, which was talk to the other actor. Are you talking to them? Are you listening to them?
Right.
And John kept saying, I am talking to them. And he's like, no, you're not. And so it took him 5 years to figure out that you have to really talk and really listen.
If he had studied with Meisner, he would have gotten it in one. He would have gotten it in 1 year just doing the repetition exercise, right?
That's exactly true. So once his career started to grow, John, and as you had said earlier, and you say in the book, you know, Strasberg was very attracted to people who were successful. You would try to claim them. So he wanted John to join the studio. And one thing that what Cassavetes did was he showed up with a friend, and he said to him, let's just improvise something on the spot and tell him that it's from this play. And so they on the spot, you know, came up with something, did it, and Strasberg was like, you guys are amazing, you're in. And he said, he told them what the play was, and Strasberg said, I haven't heard of that. He goes, well, you know what, we just made up this whole thing and you know nothing about acting. And he stormed out.
That's hilarious. I mean, Strasberg did do that. I mean, at the end of Meisner's book, Meisner accuses Strasberg of doing this, of sort of handing out honorary memberships to the Actors Studio so that he could then claim those people as his disciples or as his you know, proteges or whatever. Yeah. And there's probably some truth to that, frankly.
Yeah. You know, as you were saying, he claimed Brando, and as we had already said as well, he claimed Brando and a number of people. One thing that I heard you talk, of course, you talk about all the conflicts and that they were very comfortable fighting and arguing, and those had consequences sometimes. And just listening to some other interviews people have done with you, that's something that you brought up, and that was always fascinated me as well, because you know, now when you have conflict, people just are so uncomfortable, you know, and stop talking. And I'm like that too.
Am I. Yeah. That's probably why I highlight it so much. So I'm like, Jesus Christ, Harold Clurman threw a chair at Luther Adler in the middle of rehearsal for Awake and Sing. And then they go out drinking afterwards and laugh about it. It's like, what is going on? No, I'm not. The level of comfort. And again, I think a lot of this, frankly, I mean, I could say this as a Jew, I think being first generation Jews has something to do with it. They were just very comfortable having very heated arguments with one another in a way that is almost incomprehensible to me. Honestly.
And you know, this is something I think about often, because you know, I think a little bit of conflict can be okay. I mean, sometimes the flip side is that there's a little conflict, then people stop talking, talking to each other because they just can't handle it. Right. So sometimes I think hashing things out is fine, as long as it's perhaps done respectful. And I know Arthur Penn. I don't know if you read this, but he was even saying, you know, yeah, me and Warren Beatty fought all the time because Warren wanted to get it right and I wanted to get it right. And
they fought every day. They had this weird, like, let's have an argument every day pact on Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah, no, they fought literally daily.
Yeah, and I found, because he was saying he found a lot of acting on, he was talking on stage anyways, wasn't very good. And he'd be talking to the directors would be saying, well, the guy was a nice guy. And he's like, well, why didn't you push him to do better? And he's like, well, he's a nice guy. Everyone was just wanted to be nice. And this was a problem. He felt that people were just afraid to argue at all. So you already pretty much answered that by saying, first generation Jewish. I know, me being Italian heritage, Italians are also
yeah, you got it. We got a similar thing. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's all sorts of stuff that they tolerated both at the group and the actors studio that I actually think they probably shouldn't have. Do you know what I mean? But we do have to figure out a way to have conflict productively, both in our creative endeavors and as a society.
Yeah, I agree.
We don't really know how to do that. We don't really know how to do it. I'm not great at it. I mean, I'm good at it in some of my interpersonal relationships because I work really hard at it, but it's very hard in collaborative creative endeavors to know how to do that. And but it is wild to read about when people just don't care. They're just like, yeah, let's yell at each other, and then we're buds afterwards. Or we're not buds afterwards, but who cares, because we created this work of art,
Yeah,
it's hard. I remember I was assistant directing a show once, a musical, and there was a song in the musical that was not only a bad song, but the actor who was doing the song couldn't sing it. Like, it might have been an okay song with a different actor, but he literally couldn't really hit the notes. They were working hard on it, and someone turned to the director and said, when are you going to tell them when are you going to tell them to cut that song? Like, when are you going to get that song cut? And she said, I've told them, I've talked to them about it. They know how I feel about it. And were I a different person, I could probably force the issue, but that's just not how that's just not how I work.
Right.
Yeah. And I thought that was really fascinating that she was not willing to tell them it 100, it has to go. You have to fucking cut it.
Right.
And so, I don't know. I mean, the musical turned out not to be that great anyway, so I'm not sure whether it was a loss one way or the other, but it's a difficult thing when you're working in a collaborative endeavor to figure out how to deal with it,
Yeah. No, it's something that's always been a fascinating thing for me. Looking at the Breaking Point is a film that we mutually decided to discuss. John Garfield, this is from 1950.
Second to last movie.
Yes. It's interesting that he is known as the first film star who was method actor film star. But wouldn't that be Francois Tone? Because he was also group.
But he's, first of all, Francois Tone's not a big deal. Second of all, second of all,
he was in Phantom Lady.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that stylistically he has the impact that Garfield is having. Yeah. That's the thing. It's what Francois Tone does is he sort of lets go of that stuff so he could become a movie star. He's not really bringing that in. I mean, he may have used some method stuff, but and he also quit the group after less than 2 years. I mean, he was not in the group for very long. Whereas Garfield, you can tell immediately from Four Daughters, is bringing in this new style that's going to take over.
Yeah, no, he's always been someone I've loved a lot, and of course, he's in a number of noirs. And were you a noir fan before doing the book?
I mean, that's one reason why I defend code era studio system Hollywood films. It's you still get noir. You get noir. What's better than noir? You know what I mean? You get Fritz Lang, you get Billy Wilder.
And all the ways that they got through the code is so fascinating.
You get House on Telegraph Hill and Sudden Fear, and it's how can you be? No, I love all that stuff. But I only really knew Garfield through that, and I had not. Breaking Point and his last two movies, Breaking Point and He Ran All the Way,
are
not the easiest movies to find. Breaking Point is now on streaming, and there's a Criterion Blu-ray.
Yes.
It's very good. But it wasn't available for a while. He Ran All the Way, I think, is still only available on DVD. I'm not even sure it made the jump to Blu-ray, and is a great
think you're
movie.
Right.
So it was nice to be able to go deeper into those, and Body and Soul, Force of Evil, all those kind of films.
What's so fascinating to me about noir is that it's people have all these different kind of definitions about it. People feel it's not a genre, that it's just a style, that it it ends in 1959, and if you say anything that's 1960 is, that's neo-noir, and all these arguments online that I've had, which is really fun.
And this is a
frustrating.
breaking point's a sunshine noir, right? Because it mostly takes place during the day, right? So it's technically a sunshine noir.
Yeah, that's
true. It takes place in California. It takes place mostly during the day. It's, mostly outside.
Yeah. I know, because it doesn't have a lot of the stylistic noir tropes, but it starts towards the end. For example, that one scene that I love is when he's alone smoking in his room and he can't sleep, but he hears his wife sewing, and it's just like he's in total darkness, reminded that he can't take care of his family. But I just thought that was incredible. But I was curious if you how you see noir. Is there a certain themes that you say to yourself is certainly noir, or are you looser with it? I was curious what you thought.
I'm fairly loose with it. It's like if someone recommends the movie to me and says it's a noir, I'm going to watch it, whether I think it fits the definition or not. I think of noir as, obviously the marriage of genre plot and German expressionist aesthetics. I mean, that's the fundamental thing, in which case, and if that's true, I'm not sure the breaking point actually counts, but but it has the soul of a noir.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that gives it the soul of a noir is its anxiety about veterans returning from World War II, which is in many ways the big thematic subject matter of so much film noir. Is what are we going to do with these people who've learned how to kill and seen people die, and now we've got to reintegrate them into society? And the breaking point's very explicit about that, actually. There's a part where he comes back from his first criminal job, and she said, or maybe it's when maybe it's actually the last one, and his wife is like, what are you gonna do? And he said, nothing. They didn't give me a medal for in the Philippines.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And what he's talking about doing is killing a bunch of people.
Right.
And so there's a real darkness and cynicism and anxiety, about this war that we've just gone through, that we're also told is actually, the crowning achievement of our nation, and all that other stuff.
And what's so fascinating about this film is that he's an ordinary guy. Like he's a fisherman, and he's got debts. He's got the problems that many people have. How do you take care of the kids, and trouble with money, and the concerns from his wife, and his wife telling him, well, maybe you got to get a different job. People are having those conversations as we speak, everywhere, whether you're Canada, America, anywhere in the world. So that was something that almost makes it scarier for me, because I've been there. A lot of people have been there, and
you've had to sell your fishing boat.
One too many times. But what's so interesting about this is the fact that he doesn't feel as though he could do anything else. He tells his wife says, do something, maybe you got to do something else, and he says, I can't. But then what's interesting is that he later finds that he can be a pretty good criminal. And I think that scares him, particularly after he kills the Chinese man. He turns to crime to get back to America because he's stuck in Mexico because that guy stiffed him for money, and he turns to crime out of necessity. And I think it disturbed him. You even see him again in the dark in his room, and he's disturbed that he actually killed someone. But he begins to see that he can do this. But I don't feel that he liked that particularly. Like, I really think that at the end, when he's that scene that you brought up where he says, well, hey, why not? I got a medal for this in the Philippines. I really think at that point he was not going to turn to crime, and he was going to let these, I don't know how conscious he was, but I think he knew that there was no way he was going to be able to kill 4 or 5 guys on a boat and survive. So I really thought, it's to me that self-worth, like he really didn't think that he could take care of his family, and he was, in his mind, was better off dead. Which is, you really feel that. I was curious if that's what you also thought.
Well, to me, I feel like, look, this is not a moralistic film. It's not one of those code era, like, oh, now here's the good guy and the bad guy or whatever. It's much more complex than that. Absolutely. But it has a real moral consciousness to it. There's a depth to this movie that I think gives it a real power, you know, and part of it comes from that he just makes the wrong decision every single time, basically, you know, throughout the whole movie he just keeps making the
Yes.
wrong decision. And in a weird way, the criminal fixer, the kind of slimeball lawyer who gets
Oh
him
yeah,
in
yeah.
deeper and deeper and
He's in a
deeper,
lot of noirs. I forget the
yeah,
actor's name, but I'll have to look it up. Sorry,
he
go ahead.
he says this thing to him that's actually good advice, which is like, you know, you're such a strong guy, you won't bend until you break, you should just bend a little. Now he's trying to get him to bend a little to do crime, but it's like,
Right.
his wife is correct that he should sell the boat and move to Salinas. And you know, he keeps thinking that he's gonna have to be a lettuce picker. She wants him to manage lettuce picker. Like, they have a good life they could go live,
Yeah.
that he's refusing to do because he needs his dignity. You know, he's almost
Right.
like James Caan and Thief or something. You know, it's like that very
Yes.
Michael Mann idea that of a man who's going to sacrifice everything to his dignity, because his dignity is ultimately what's most important, is his ability to be what's the line that in Thief, Joe the boss of my own body, you know, that's the thing that's going to be the most important to him. And so you know, in classic noir fashion, he makes a mistake, which is accepting this he sort of backed into it, but accepting this, you know, to be a coyote to smuggle these Chinese immigrants from Mexico to the United States. And then it turns out the coyote wants to pay him to just drown them at sea.
Right.
And then the coyote tries to kill him. So it's like, I don't know
Right.
how this guy does any business if he's constantly double crossing everyone. But
Right.
but you know, he makes the wrong decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it gets not only him in a lot of trouble, but it gets an innocent man killed, his partner,
Yes.
was an extraordinary actor and performance. His kind of, you know, he has this kind
Yeah,
of
he's great.
textbook,
That's Juano Hernandez, who
yeah,
plays Wesley Perk. Yeah.
and you know, Hernandez has this kind of somewhat typical, you know, he's the black character who's the voice of moral reason, who's also loyal and is going to stick with the white guy to the end, right? You know, that's a trope that we're still dealing with.
Right.
But he's given a lot of depth and dignity and gravitas by Hernandez's performance. I mean, it's a real role. And in some ways, that character's death is the real tragedy of the film. It is not that John Garfield's going to lose his arm. You know, like, he's actually going to be okay.
Yeah.
He pays just enough of a price for what he's done, you know, to
Right.
satisfy the code administration. But, you know, the last shot of that movie is a lingering shot on the now orphan black kid, wandering the docks looking for his father, and his father's dead body's been thrown overboard. He's never going to know what happened to his dad. And and I have to imagine that was Curtiz's doing, and that's not.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it must be.
And so you can feel this kind of, you know, moral intelligence is just infusing this movie at every step with depth and power, and it really comes out in that choice and in the performances by the leading cast.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I mean, like, isn't it fascinating that he decides to take that job to help the robbers get to their getaway boat, right? And then he's thinking, I'm going to double cross him and get the reward money, and that's what's going to get me in the car. And it's right at that moment that he finally decides to cheat on his wife. Like, you know, Priscilla Neal, or Patricia Neal's the future Mrs. Roald Dahl's been hanging out, you know, trying to seduce him all throughout the movie. And at that point, he's clearly like, he's hit his rock bottom. He's like, nothing fucking matters anymore, so I might as well cheat on my wife. And then he goes up to her room and he can't go through with it.
Right.
What a wild sequence of events to have at that moment in the movie, you know?
No, absolutely. And that's why I really thought that on whether he was conscious of it or not, because you see in the voiceover, he's saying, I'm doing it for my wife and I'm doing it for the reward. He's saying it over and over. He's trying to convince himself. But I think I think there's truth to that. But I really think that he didn't think he had a chance. Again, I think that's where that self-worth comes in, that he didn't feel that he was a quote unquote man. I mean, he was like this patriarchal family, and he's disturbed that his wife has to take a job, you know, like, it's just, he just can't handle, that. But Patricia Neal is an actor I've always really, really liked. She joined the actor studio later. I don't know if she was formally trained or how that happened, but she did join at a certain point.
Yeah.
So I don't know if at this point she had that training, but she's really good in this. Like she's very seductive and sexy. She's got those femme fatale tropes. But what's interesting about her character is that she falls for someone who doesn't have any money, and
Right.
and as she says later, that she had fallen once for a guy with broken fingernails, and maybe she should have went for him as opposed to men with money. And I think she really admired and she says to John Garfield's wife, Lucy, I envy you because you have family. And I think she was genuine. I think she really, you think that she's up to no good, which she is, but she also has this sort of different side to her where she admires people who love each other and that's, and that they have a family and that they're ordinary and they're not greedy and things like that.
All of the principals in this movie want something they don't have, right? And the thing that I think she both genuinely wants him and maybe even falls in love with him over the course of the movie, but she also wants what he has, which is just like a stable life, even though she's clearly addicted to the chaos of, every man you meet through her is her fiance, right? There's a certain level of chaos that she's addicted to, but she also wants that life. And in fact, the yearning for a different one. Well, first of all, we should just talk about how frankly horny this movie is. Like, one of the interesting things about it is you could get away with people being horny if they were married, right? And so because there's a married couple, because the protagonist is married, they're just constantly talking about boning. They're constantly talking about boning.
Yeah, she says, "You excite when I think about you. I get so excited. Like
I could get excited about you any time." She says, "I could get excited about you anytime." Like she's not talking about being, excited about seeing it. They're talking about banging. And there's a part where she's kissing him and she says, "What if the kids come back?" And he says, "It'll be educational," right? So and there's a part where he tells his 9-year-old she's too old to be dressed in she's washing her hands in a nightie or something, which is like a weird thing. It's like, that girl's nowhere. That's a 9-year-old. Like, anyway.
Yeah, I wondered about that too.
Very weird, but it's a very horny movie. It's as horny as any noir, of this period, I think. But in terms of the yearning for what you don't have, one of the greatest moments in it and one of the most complicated scenes to me, and it's very Lynchian in its way, is when the wife cuts and dyes her hair to look like Patricia Neal's hair.
Oh my God, yeah.
Weird and perverted. And then she has this scene with John Garfield where she's saying, "Do you like it? If you don't like it, I'll change it back." And what's brilliant about that scene is that there's no right answer that Garfield can give her, because she's insecure about her looks. So she wants Garfield to say, "I love it. You look so beautiful. Let's go to bed right now." But she doesn't want Garfield to be more attracted to her with the haircut of the woman she's jealous of. So she both wants him to say, "I love it. Let's go to bed." And she wants him to say, "I hate it. Change it back. I love you just the way you are." At the same time. And you can just see how pained she is about this exchange they're having. It's such a brilliant scene, I think.
No, that's really well said. No, I completely agree. And you see that, as he's getting to know Patricia Neal, John Garfield, at first he's trying to distance himself from her, but you can see that he clearly wants her. And of course, seeing her with his wife with the blonde hair, he's able to now act out that fantasy that I'm sure is going on in his head.
Totally.
About Patricia Neal, and of course, later as you mentioned, he was going to pursue her right before, I think in his mind, I think he figured he was going to get killed. So why not?
Right.
And that I really like that, love triangle between the three. Even that scene where he's drunk at the bar and his wife comes in and sees them talking.
He does this.
Yeah.
Like, yada.
All the subtext there. And he's genuinely happy to see her. He's not like, "Oh no, this is good." I mean, he's also drunk, but I love the way he played that scene. Just, he was purely innocent and like, "No, I told you I don't like her. See?"
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I don't like her at all. I just we were just talking. And he means it. He that's the crazy thing, is that she doesn't trust him, and she's she is jealous, but he genuinely like, he just wants his wife. He's not really interested in anything else.
Yeah, no, exactly. What is it about Garfield that is so good to you? Why does he pop out as a great, from that method tradition?
Well, I mean, I think in this movie, he's doing something different in that a lot of it's about restraint. It's a very minimalist performance.
Yes.
I mean, there's shots where, his body, he's barely moving, so it's really internalized. And so you get a sense of that, like, real restraint. But in his earlier work, particularly in this film, Four Daughters, which was his first movie, he really is one of the first people bringing the full neuroticism of the method to American cinema. There's a playfulness and power and willingness to go beyond type and to really play the role and the situation and the character as opposed to the persona of the actor that I think is really groundbreaking and powerful. He's in a lot of bad movies. A lot of people from that time are in a lot of bad movies, just that they were putting out so many movies.
Of course.
There's a lot of bad ones, but even in some of those, he's great. And the good ones are really, really, really astounding, I think. And I think that especially once his character starts to feel hunted and trapped, like what he lets out and the way he does it is just, I don't know, it's really impressive to me. It's a really impressive performance. He has to go a really far way because he's a happy man at the beginning of the movie. He does not make any money. He's worried. He has his worries, but he has this like, he's run out of gas. He has that immediate problem. I mean, he's very angry at the beginning of the movie. He's angry throughout most of it, but like he's in a general state where things are okay. But he's living on the edge, right? So once that guy fucks him over in Mexico, he's sort of doomed. So he has his worries, but like the way you see Garfield's very controlled about how he starts to let you see the complexity and complications of the character. And I just find that really impressive.
Yeah, no, me too. Well, that's something that you pointed out in the book that hadn't really dawned on me. The one thing that was so great about these method actors was they would have so much going on emotionally, but they would hold it. Michael Pacino as Michael Corleone, Rod Steiger as the pawnbroker. That's something that certainly you didn't see before as much. I mean, maybe you did. I just can't think of anything off the top of my head. But that, these people who could just bring so much to their face, but not really let it out. And,
right.
This film and the other two, Godfather and Pawnbrokers, certainly you see that quite beautifully.
Part of the thing that Strasberg was really brilliant about, I really believe this, is this idea of suppression that, like in rehearsal or in class or preparing for the day's shoot or whatever it is, you're letting everything out, right? So that what it is, But then when you get into the run through or into this, then it's all about having the character bottle it up. So then once the character's bottling it all up, it's going to find its way out somehow.
Of course.
And then you just follow that impulse because isn't that interesting?
Right.
I think that's really smart. I think that's one of the smartest things that kind of Strasberg came up with, frankly.
Yeah, and that's what people do, right? I mean, we do try to hide. We do wear masks, but as you said, you gotta. I know Meisner said this as well. If you watch like the DVDs of 10 hours of Meisner teaching, right, which I love. This one woman, female in the class, was doing a scene, and I forget exactly what he was saying to her, but she said, "Oh, so she's like, wait, so you mean that I should, hide what I'm feeling?" And then he said, "Well, my dear, you have to have it first." I just love that. Have it first and then hide it. Yeah. No, that is, it's just fascinating to me, this whole subject, and we could talk endlessly about it, but I know I feel like I've taken up so much of your time. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. This has been wonderful. I do have to leave to pick my daughter up at school.
Yeah,
but this has been really great.
I'll let you go. Wallace Ford was that other actor that we were talking about who sets up John Garfield's
he's
character.
Great. Yeah, and he's always a slime ball, right?
Always. Yeah, he's in a lot of really, really good noirs.
I love how that character wants to be treated nicely. He's always just complaining that John Garfield's too rude to him. He's like, you should be nice to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And he doesn't understand why they want him to go on the job, but you could see that he's like, oh crap, like what are they going to do?
Oh yeah, he knows
sure
he's
enough,
doomed. Yeah.
Sure enough, I imagine that was because they knew he'd be slower to run and they'd have to stop and shoot him first. That's what I thought.
Or I mean, I think they're clearing. I don't think they want anyone to know who they were, or I mean, I think they're also just their plan is to kill everyone who helped them set up the job.
Yeah. Get them on the boat later. No, it's a really, really great film. I think it was on the Criterion channel. I don't believe it is anymore.
I don't think it is anymore. Yeah. But it's it's worth actually buying the DVD, which has a nice interview with it's got a great interview with Garfield's daughter, Julie, who I've actually been a little bit in touch with since the book came out, which has been really wonderful. And it's got some nice featurettes, and the print is amazing. I mean, it's much better than the version you're going to stream if you rent it off Apple or, Amazon.
Yeah, no, I agree. I recommend getting the Criterion. And so where can people follow you on social media? You're on Twitter, I believe.
I'm basically just on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is Parabasis, which is PARABASIS. And then the podcast that I host is called Working. It's a podcast through slate.com. You could subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts, or go to slate.com/working. You can find it there.
Great, perfect. And the book, I imagine people can get pretty much anywhere online.
Get the book pretty much anywhere. I'm a big fan of ordering it from Bookshop, which is a network of independent bookstores online. That's so if you want to get it online, or get it at your local indie bookstore or whatever.
Fantastic. And now I better stop seeing people writing articles when the method goes too far.
It's never going to end. It's never going to end, but hopefully that will just mean better publicity for me. Who knows?
Yes, exactly. All you people, go read the book before you write that kind of
exactly.
Do your research.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, it's a wonderful, again, it's
thank you very much.
Book. I loved it. I'm sure I'll read it again. So again, actors, directors, anyone in theater, film, this is a must read. So Isaac, well, thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Robert.
Really appreciate. I mean, I was concerned. I was like, oh my god, I'm going to keep this in for hours because I had so many questions. But thank you so much. And
I'm flattered.
I hope that you can come again sometime, because this is such a big subject. We could talk endlessly. So thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You have a good one, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to my YouTube channel on the audio version of my podcast and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I also want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting me on Patreon and becoming a member, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. Patreon is bonus content that I create month in and month out exclusively for members. And it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which as a member, you will very much have access to vote on. So if you like my work and you're interested in supporting me over on Patreon, head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation to my YouTube channel podcast if you like my work at kofi.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. The link is in the description box down below. And lastly, if this is your first time here on my YouTube channel, or if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.